Brahms is a controversial figure in music history. Egotistical, prickly, and rude to everyone, including his close friends. He was called backward-looking for his devotion to the forms of the previous generation, the classical period. In his 20s, he was hailed as the savior of music by Robert Schumann, a composer who would fight back against the new German school of composing, headed by Liszt and Wagner. It would take him another 20 years to claim that title through his major orchestral works. Brahms would obsessively hold back the works that he did not think met his compositional standard, burning sketches and early works. He also burned letters, actively trying to mold the idea of his legacy into something he found fit for history. Today we will be surveying Brahms' early life up to his relationship with Clara Schumann. Brahms was born in Hamburg in 1833 to Johann Jacob Brahms and Johanna Henrika Christiane Niesen. Brahms' father, Johann Jacob, was a gigging musician on the double bass and the horn. During Brahms' childhood, he would play for the local militia and become a double bass player in the Hamburg Philharmonic Society. As Johann Jacob prospered, the Brahms family moved from house to house, upgrading their accommodations. Johann Jacob was Brahms' first music teacher, determined to give his child the chance he felt he never had. Brahms' father had to fight with his family to become a musician. He trained Brahms in cello, horn, and violin. Brahms' wish was to play the piano, so Johann Jacob found him a teacher, Otto Kossel, in 1840. Brahms would study with him and practice at his house for most of his childhood. When Brahms was 10, Johann Jacob pulled together an official debut for Brahms, a concert in support of his continued studies. Brahms performed Beethoven's Quintet for Piano and Winds, Opus 16, and a piano quartet by Mozart. In the audience was an impresario that tried to dazzle the Brahms family into allowing him to take Brahms on a tour of America as a prodigy. His piano teacher, Otto Kossel, was so shocked and dismayed by this that he gave his most promising student over to his teacher, Edward Markson, one of the leading musicians in Hamburg, to try to dissuade the family from leaving. The plot worked, and Brahms did not depart for America. Markson had been a personal acquaintance of Beethoven and Schubert, admired the works of Mozart and Haydn, and was a devotee of the mostly forgotten music of J.S. Bach. It was Markson's grounding in the style and form of the previous generation of composers that would put an indelible mark on Brahms' compositional style for his entire life. By the time he was 18, with the first works he allowed to survive, Brahms possessed something that cannot be taught, a musical voice audibly grounded in tradition and at the same time unlike any other ever heard. Brahms thought that Markson's education was incomplete. Early on, Brahms was always unsure of himself with orchestration. It would take him many years and the help of many friends before Brahms became a sure orchestrator. It was also around this time that Brahms was forced by his father to support the family with his newfound talent at the piano. Brahms started to play in the bars and brothels around the seaport of Hamburg in the red light district. This was to have a profound effect on Brahms throughout his life. Not only was he playing for sailors and their girls, but he was also thrust into the scene night after night. Later in life, Brahms would recall those nights as something dark and shameful. He began to despise the idea of women and began a misogyny that permeated the rest of his life. He would never be able to separate the idea of women and love from what he saw in the rough dives of St. Pauli's. He would put some women of talent on a pedestal, virginal and untouchable, but never marry. In 1850, Brahms met Hungarian violinist Edward Remenyi and accompanied him in a number of recitals over the next few years. They went on recital tours through Germanic lands, at this point not a true country, where Brahms accompanied Remenyi in performance. Remenyi introduced Brahms to the Hungarian style of music and started a love affair between Brahms and the Magyar and Hungarian folk music style. Through his association with Remenyi, Brahms met one of his closest friends and collaborators, for the rest of his life, virtuoso violinist Joseph Joachim. Brahms remembered Joachim playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto in Hamburg a few years earlier and was excited to meet him. During that first meeting, Brahms played some of his own solo piano pieces for Joachim, who remembered 50 years later, "Never in the course of my artist life have I been more completely overwhelmed." Joachim had already been the concertmaster of Liszt's orchestra in Weimar and had a philosophical falling out with the new German school of Liszt. Due to his disillusionment with Liszt's music, the dislike of Liszt's circle of sycophants, and Liszt's grandstanding during performance, the grimacing, the fainting, the suffering Christ act. It would take Joachim a few more years to make his break with the new German school public. Joachim found a new vision for the future in the music of Brahms and began promoting him to his well-connected friends. One of Joachim's friends that he insisted that Brahms meet was Robert Schumann. Brahms was about to embark on a hiking tour of the Rhine. Hiking was one of Brahms' favorite leisure activities, and he would keep it up for his whole life. And Joachim mentioned that the Schumann's residence in Dusseldorf was on the way. Brahms expressed doubt in meeting with the Schumanns because a few years before the composer had been in Hamburg and Brahms had sent him a package of his compositions, only for the package to be returned unopened. Joachim pressed and Brahms folded. He knocked on the Schumann's door in Dusseldorf on September 30th, 1853. The Schumanns were out, so Brahms was told to come back the next day before noon. He did and was ushered into the house and asked to play something. He played his piano sonatas and a number of other works for both Robert and Clara Schumann all afternoon. Once Brahms was done, Robert patted him on the shoulder and told him, "You and I understand each other." He was invited over to lunch the next day, then convinced to stay with the Schumanns for the next month until Joachim was scheduled to be in Dusseldorf. Thus, a long, fruitful friendship was forged with both Robert and Clara Schumann. Robert wasted little time advancing Brahms' interest to his circle. On October 28, 1853, Robert published an article about Brahms in the newer Zeitschrift for Music called Neue Bahnen, or New Paths, nominating Brahms as the one who was fated to give expression to the times in the highest and most ideal manner, basically setting Brahms up in opposition to Liszt, Wagner, and the new German school. Brahms would spend the next 20 years wrestling with the notoriety that article hung around his neck like a millstone. Schumann also persuaded Breitkopf and Hartel to buy and publish some of Brahms' compositions. They published both his Opus 1, the Piano Sonata No. 1 in C major, and Opus 2, the Piano Sonata No. 2 in F-sharp minor, along with some other works. Also published was Brahms' Piano Sonata No. 3 in F minor, his last piano sonata. Brahms never returned to the form. Let's look at that piano sonata, one of the most successful piano sonatas in the century. Brahms comes close to the pianism of Liszt in this tempestuous work. There's a masterful combination of free romantic spirit and strict classical architecture, the calling cards of Brahms' future directions as a composer. The piano sonata is infused with the instantly recognizable motive from Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 during the first movement, third, and fourth movements. It was the last work he submitted to Robert for critique. Let's hear the opening of the work, contrasting a forceful and pianistic entrance that spans almost the entire range of the piano register with a dark and mystical section, only to go back to the forceful motive. beset by mental illness, in February of 1854, Robert Schumann tried to take his life by jumping off a bridge in Dusseldorf into the Rhine. After he was fished out by some boatmen, Robert was committed to an asylum near Bonn. Brahms was in Hanover with Joachim when word of Robert reached them. Brahms immediately set out for Dusseldorf, with Joachim following a few weeks behind. Clara reignited her solo career, starting to tour as a piano virtuoso to support her 7 children. During this time, Brahms mostly stayed in Dusseldorf, arranging Robert's papers and sorting his compositions, playing with the Schumann children and visiting Robert in Bonn. Clara was not allowed to visit Robert until 2 days before he died, so Brahms acted as an intermediary. Slowly, during this time, Brahms began to fall in love with Clara Schumann. A formidable musician, she seemed everything that Brahms could have wanted. Just as slowly, Clara fell in love with him. Even though she was still devoted to her husband Robert, she was coming to rely on Brahms more and more for emotional comfort during trying times. They wrote very expressive letters to one another, declaring their love for one another. Brahms wrote Clara in one letter, "I wish I could write to you as tenderly as I love you and tell you all the good things that I wish you. You are so infinitely dear to me, dearer than I can say. If this goes on much longer as they are at present, I shall have some time to put you under glass or to have you set in gold. If only I could live in the same town with you and my parents. Do write me a nice letter soon. Your letters are like kisses." Romantic letters were the vogue of the time, reflecting the Romantic period, but the ardor that flowed between Brahms and Clara was something else. Just in the middle of this crescendo of feeling, Robert died in the asylum in Bonn. Clara saw him and tended to him in his last days. 2 months later, Clara and Brahms decided to go on vacation in Switzerland. Since propriety said they could not go alone, they brought Clara's sons and Brahms' sickly sister, Elise. During the trip, Clara and Brahms' relationship came to a head. Brahms was not going to marry Clara. Jan Swafford, in his book Johannes Brahms, a biography, addresses Brahms' reasons, saying that Brahms had decided that he did not know how to support Clara and her 7 children, as propriety said he must if they married. He had little idea of how he was going to support himself. He also thought that to write the music that he must, and he was driven to, he had to shut away life, denying himself a family and a woman that needed him. Clara's daughter, Eugene, was to write of the time, "He broke away ruthlessly. My mother suffered all the more as she could not understand the change in him." When the vacation ended, Brahms left Dusseldorf for his hometown of Hamburg, back to his family. He and Clara were to stay close confidants and collaborators for the rest of Clara's life. She never stopped championing Brahms' music, nor her husband's, in her concerts. Thank you for joining me today for this video about the early life of Brahms. If you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It really helps out. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. I get no ad revenue due to the important musical examples, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. The bibliography for this video can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on social media, so follow me for more updates. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.